My parents didn't just disown me. They erased me from their lives, telling the world I was dead to them. My crime? I fell in love with a man they called a nobody, someone completely beneath our station. They cast me out with nothing, confident I would come crawling back. What they didn't know was that this so-called nobody was secretly a billionaire, and his fortune could swallow their entire legacy whole. This is the story of how my husband didn't just prove them wrong. He bought their world right out from under them, and I was there to hand them the eviction notice myself. Part 1. The golden legacy. My family erased me from the family tree, treating me as if I were a ghost who never existed. My crime? To give my heart to a man they deemed unworthy, someone beneath our station. What they could never have guessed was that the man they scorned possessed a fortune that could buy and sell their entire clan and the legacy they were so proud of. I am Eliza, and this is the story of how my own family's arrogance and obsession with status led to their downfall in the most satisfying way possible. Let me paint you a picture of where I grew up. It wasn't a home. It was a monument to my parents. Success, a palace of polished marble and shimmering glass, where footsteps echoed in the cold silence. My childhood was a series of expensive lessons at prestigious schools. My wardrobe was a billboard for their wealth, and every meal was a performance of gourmet cuisine. Materially, I never wanted for anything. But what I didn't realize then was that for my parents, money wasn't just important. It was their religion. A person's worth was determined not by their character, but by the balance in their bank account. I was raised to be their perfect doll, always smiling, walking gracefully, and preparing for my most important role, a strategic marriage. My entire future was mapped out like a business plan. From the university I would attend to the sons of prominent dynasties I was permitted to date. Everything revolved around strengthening our position, expanding our social connections, and ensuring the family name would forever remain at the pinnacle of society. I didn't resist, because I knew no other world. This was how families like ours operated, wasn't it? But then Daniel appeared, and my carefully controlled world began to fracture. That seemingly accidental encounter would become my parents' worst nightmare and my own beautiful liberation. They had no idea that when they tried to extinguish our love and push me out of their lives, they were signing the death warrant for their own hollow empire. Part 2. The real world. The gateway to another world opened for me on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, inside a small coffee shop my family would never set foot in. It was my sanctuary, a space with walls covered in art that followed no rules, chairs worn smooth with use, and an air thick with the scent of roasted coffee and warm cinnamon. It was a scent of real life, a stark contrast to the smell of expensive perfume and judgment in my world. And then he appeared in the most clumsy way imaginable. Daniel bumped into my table, spilling a long trail of coffee on a handbag that cost more than an ordinary person's monthly salary. Any of the boys from my circle would have panicked, followed by a series of calculated apologies. But Daniel was different. His eyes looked directly at me, not at the handbag, and in them there was only sincere remorse. He wore a simple shirt and a pair of jeans faded from use, not from fashion. Everything about him exuded a surprising sense of calm. We started talking, and for the first time in my life, I felt I was truly heard. He didn't ask what school I went to or what my father did. He asked about the paintings that moved my soul, the books that changed my perspective, and the secret dreams I never dared to speak aloud to anyone. For those 3 hours, I forgot I was the heiress to a fortune, forgot about the galas and the suffocating rules of etiquette. I was simply Eliza. To him, I wasn't a name to connect with, but a soul to be discovered. For the next 6 months, I lived 2 parallel lives. By day, I would sneak away to see Daniel. We would walk through streets I never knew existed, eat at little diners with unbelievably delicious food, and laugh at the simplest things. He taught me that happiness wasn't something that could be bought. An afternoon walk in the park with him meant more than all the extravagant galas I had ever attended. Then, in the evening, I would return, putting on the mask of the obedient daughter, attending dinners where people only spoke of stocks and corporate mergers. I tried to maintain that fragile bubble of happiness, deceiving myself that I could keep both worlds. But deep down, I knew I was only delaying the inevitable. My mother began to notice the change in my eyes, that my smile was no longer an act. And I knew soon the storm would break. Part 3. The Ultimatum and the Severance. The storm didn't arrive with a clap of thunder, but with a question from my mother, as light as air, when she saw me smiling to myself in my room. "What has you so happy, Eliza?" And in a moment of foolish naivety, I told her the truth. I told her about Daniel, about how he made me feel truly alive, about a love that was pure and untainted by calculations of status. I watched my mother's face transform through a spectrum of emotions, from curiosity to concern and finally to absolute horror. Her smile froze, and her voice was as sharp and cold as daggers of ice. "Absolutely not," she said. "I don't know what rebellious phase you're going through, but it ends now. You will not throw away everything we have built for some construction worker who's obviously using you for your money." My father was even worse. When my mother told him, he didn't yell. He just looked at me with a cold and final gaze, a heavy disappointment that hurt more than 1,000 reprimands. "I raised you better than this," he said, his voice low. "I gave you every advantage, and this is how you repay us? By slumming it with a nobody? They didn't give me a choice. They gave me an ultimatum. I had exactly 1 week to come to my senses and end it with Daniel. Either I chose their vision for my life, complete with an approved husband from their social class, or I would be cut off completely. No money, no family, no safety net. They were certain I couldn't survive without their wealth, but they were wrong. For the first time in my life, I had tasted what it felt like to be loved for myself, not for what I represented. Daniel loved the girl who talked for hours about art in coffee shops, not be heiress to a fortune. And I realized I could not give up the only real thing I had ever had. The day I told my parents I was choosing Daniel was the day I lost my family. Forever. The punishment was swift and cruel. Overnight, my credit cards were canceled, my trust fund frozen. When I returned from Daniel's apartment, the locks on the house had been changed. They had thrown my past out onto the doorstep in a few cardboard boxes, like tossing away a broken object. But the cruelest part was yet to come. They didn't just erase me from their lives. They invented a new version of me, a pitiful, unhinged girl, controlled by a gold digger, and told that story to their entire world. They told friends and relatives I was receiving treatment, somewhere far away. That's when I understood that the deepest scar isn't losing money, but having your honor and your truth stolen by the very people you love. They had made me a stranger in my own life story. And in that storm, Daniel was the only anchor that held me. He was there, wiping my tears, and together, we began to build a new life from scratch. A small life filled with a sincerity that gilded cage could never contain. Part 4. The curtain rises. 8 months passed. We had built a life from the fragments my family had left behind. Our small apartment had become a true home, filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals, a luxury the palace of my parents never had. I got my first job at a small art gallery, and for the first time in my life, I felt the pride of holding a paycheck I had earned myself. I was truly happy. Then one evening, Daniel came home with a strange nervousness I had never seen in him. He sat me down on an old second-hand sofa, took my hands, and my heart immediately sank. My mind raced with the worst possibilities. He was sick. He had lost his job. Or worse, He was going to say my parents were right and he couldn't do this anymore. "Eliza," he began, his voice hesitating slightly, "there's something I need to tell you about who I really am." This was it, I thought. The moment my parents had been waiting for. The play would end, and the man I had given up everything for would be revealed. But his next words were something my wildest imagination could not have conceived. I laughed, because I thought he was joking. "I'm not really a consultant," he continued. "Well, I am, but not in the way you think. I'm the CEO of Morrison Industries. I own it." The name was vaguely familiar. Daniel opened his laptop and showed me. The company website, his photo on the executive board, news articles about a business empire he had built from scratch. My entire world, which I had so carefully rebuilt over the past 8 months, seemed to shatter into pieces. Morrison Industries wasn't a small firm. It was a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation. The man my parents called a nobody was in fact wealthier than their entire lineage combined. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice a whisper. He explained that he had learned a bitter lesson early in life. Money changes how people see you. He was tired of relationships where women only saw the dollar signs in his bank account. When he met me, he wanted to know if someone could love him for who he was, not what he had. He wanted to find someone who could see past the shell of money to the real person inside, ironically, the very thing I had always longed for. The irony of fate was unbelievably bitter and sweet. I had fallen in love with him thinking he had nothing, while he had fallen in love with me when I seemingly had everything and was willing to throw it all away. He confessed he had planned to tell me on our first wedding anniversary, but seeing the pain and humiliation my parents had inflicted on me, my pain had sown a different intention in him. Not just the truth to be revealed, but an elaborately staged play to demand justice. And I was to be the leading lady in that sweet revenge. Part 5. The perfect move. In the weeks that followed, I witnessed a completely different Daniel. No longer just the simple, warm husband I knew. He became an architect of revenge, a cold-blooded strategist who could see all of his opponent's weaknesses. He sat in our home office, and the stage for the greatest drama of their lives began to be set. Daniel had quietly commissioned an investigation into my parents' finances. He discovered a crucial fact. Their wealth was primarily in fixed assets, real estate, and car dealerships. Their liquid cash was limited, and the jewel in their crown, their proudest fortress, was the very house where I grew up. It was both their symbol of power and their Achilles heel. Daniel's plan was beautiful and cruel in its simplicity. He would not engage in a direct confrontation. He would use the very weapons my parents worshipped against them: money and greed. He established a shell company, a phantom entity on paper, with a name full of poignant irony: Elena Holdings. Elena, my middle name, the name my grandmother had given me. A woman who would surely have been ashamed of how her son and daughter-in-law had treated their only grandchild. The trap was set perfectly. An offer was sent to my parents through Elena Holdings, an all-cash deal to buy the house. $50,000 above market value, with a closing in just 30 days. It was bait too tempting for any greedy soul to refuse. The offer played directly to their arrogance, making them believe their taste and investments were truly exceptional. They never suspected a thing. Greed had clouded their judgment. I later heard my parents were ecstatic. They went around boasting about their own cleverness, about selling their house for a fantastic price to some mysterious investment firm. They had already begun planning for an even more lavish life, an even larger mansion, an even more exclusive neighborhood. The process went smoothly. They happily signed the papers, handing over the keys without knowing they were handing their weapons over to the enemy. They packed their expensive belongings, dreaming of a more glorious future. Little did they know, They were clearing the way for their own downfall, and the one about to push them off the cliff was the very person they had ruthlessly cast aside. The clock was ticking, and I waited for the day the final curtain of their play would rise. Part 6. The day of judgment, the day they were to move out, was a beautiful, sunny day, a cruel irony of nature. We didn't arrive in a moving truck. We arrived in Daniel's luxury car, and he wore a perfectly tailored suit that cost more than the car my father used to be so proud of. I stood beside him in a dress that spoke of quiet confidence, feeling more grounded than ever before. We were not the outcasts returning. We were the new masters, coming to claim what was ours. My father himself opened the door, his face still holding the smugness of a man about to embark on a grander new chapter. But then he saw us. The usual arrogance on his face melted away, replaced by confusion, then recognition, and finally, a silent horror as his mind tried to connect the impossible. Daniel wasted no time. He didn't need to introduce himself. The look in my father's eyes said it all. He simply presented a neatly bound set of documents. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harrison." His voice was frighteningly calm. "I believe this is my house now, and this is a notice requiring you to vacate the premises within 24 hours. There was no anger, just the cold finality of a game that had reached its end. My mother stumbled out from behind him. She had heard everything. "Impossible," she stammered, grabbing the doorframe to keep from falling. You're a nobody. You can't do this." She muttered nonsense, clinging to the world where we were still the inferiors, a world that had just collapsed before her very eyes. My father, in a last-ditch effort to save a shred of his dignity, tried to negotiate. He turned to Daniel, attempting to use his old tone of superiority. "We can work something out," he said. "You surely don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. This house requires a certain level of maintenance, a certain type of owner." It was the plea of a dethroned king, still trying to command the one who had taken his kingdom. Daniel just smiled, a polite smile that held no warmth. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I can manage." He paused for a beat, then put his arm around my waist, pulling me close. He looked directly into my father's eyes and delivered the final blow. "Actually, this house is going to be a gift from my wife." His gaze softened as he looked at me. "Eliza has always loved this place. I thought it was time she came home." In that moment, I didn't feel hatred. I only felt a deep peace. It was like a fever that had lasted for years had finally broken. All the pain, all the humiliation they had put me through seemed to evaporate into the air. The curtain of their play had fallen, and on the stage of my own life, I had finally won. I had come home on my own terms. Part 7. The true legacy, looking back on everything that happened. I realized a precious lesson about family. True family isn't always the people who gave birth to you and raised you. True family are the people who see your worth even when you are at your lowest, who choose to stand by you when the whole world turns away, who love the real you instead of the version they want you to be. My parents taught me that money was the most important thing, but Daniel showed me that respect and true love are the priceless assets. They thought that cutting me off was a punishment. In reality, it was a gift. They had freed me from their expectations, allowing me to discover who I truly was. My parents never apologized. They moved to a smaller house across town and told anyone who would listen a new tragic story that their daughter had married a criminal who had used illegal means to steal their home. But the truth, once planted, has a powerful life of its own. When Daniel's true identity became public, when their friends realized exactly who it was they had scorned, the social consequences that rained down on them were swifter and more brutal than any financial loss. They became a joke in the very high society they had spent their lives trying to conquer. And us? We are still unbelievably happy. We kept the house. Every morning, waking up in my old room, I no longer see the ghost of a suffocating past. Instead, I see a reminder that sometimes the true path home begins by giving up everything you thought you wanted, only to discover what you truly need. The house is no longer a symbol of hollow wealth, but a symbol of our love and our victory. Daniel. And I realized our wealth would be meaningless if not built on a foundation of kindness. We have used our resources to help other young people, those who have been cast out by their families simply because they dared to choose love over material expectations. We have learned that a true legacy isn't measured in dollars in a bank account, but by the relationships you build, the compassion you spread, and the courage you have to walk your own path, even when no one else believes in you.